everyone. I'm going to introduce our author. Marilyn Turk is an award-winning author of historical fiction flavored with some romance and suspense. She has written the Coastal Lights Legacy series and the Suspicious Shores series, as well as novellas in the Great Lakes Lighthouse Brides, Crinoline Cowboys, Heart of the Midwife, and The Christmas Gazebo. Her newest titles include Abigail's Secret and MISStletoe Mishaps with her novella Kaetlyn's Cup of Christmas Cheer. A lighthouse enthusiast who has visited over 100 lighthouses, she makes sure you'll find one in every book she writes. And Marilyn lives in Florida near the water so that she and her husband can enjoy boating, fishing, and hanging out at the beach. For those who are attending the Zoom author program, you will automatically be placed in a drawing for a book giveaway. Marilyn has been so generous and she's donating 4 books. So there'll be 4 winners with 1 book each. I've got the chat box going and we're going to do a Q&A after the program. So if you have any questions, just put them in the chat box. So Marilyn, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yay.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is so different. I was there in, was it January? Anyway, before COVID.
Not long ago.
Yeah, so I was looking forward to seeing you again in person, but that's not going to happen anytime soon, I guess. So I wanted to tell you about my new books that came out this year. And my first slide. Abigail's Secret came out in August. And, you know, the 2020 has been a bummer for most everybody, but thank God I had some things in the works. And so I had 3 books come out, actually 4, including the daily guidepost, which I have devotions in. So it wasn't a total wash for me. And then I did also sign some new contracts for 2021. Abigail's Secret is about Abby Baker, a young woman who returns to her childhood home in Maine to help her ailing mother and to recover, start her life over after her Marine husband was killed. And she's trying to balance care for her mother with care for her little girl who's a preschooler. And she often feels inadequate to the task. She wishes that she had the strength of her namesake, who was Abigail. And Abigail was a lighthouse keeper, a widow. She became a lighthouse keeper after her husband was drowned. She also was raising a child on her own. So Abby thinks that Abigail had a secret to her strength that she doesn't have. And when Abby, first of all, Carson Stevens is a young man who purchases the lighthouse property with the intention of turning into a bed and breakfast. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but a lot of lighthouses were declared excess by the government after the Coast Guard took them over in 1939, and also as a result of GPS on most marine vehicles, they felt that many lighthouses weren't needed anymore. So they started selling them off at auction. And there are a lot of individuals that have bought them. And normally you have to buy them with, the intent of restoring them. So this is this young man's dream, is to buy a lighthouse and restore it, turn it into a B&B. And he meets Abby and enlists her help in doing that. So during the process, she learns more about her grandmother and her own history than she bargained for, actually. Abigail's Secret is my first attempt to write a dual time book, which means there's 2 stories going on kind of at the same time. So you have Abby, who's a contemporary person who has a story. And then we find her grandmother's story in the background that's running also. So they're woven together so that you realize, the connection at the end. The historical part of it is set in World War II, and it's based on true history of what it was like here in the United States in 1944. And during that time, the Coast Guard were manning the lighthouses as far as using them for surveillance. So many of the keepers were still there, but the lights were actually put out because they didn't want the enemy to see them. So I chose Maine for the setting because I've been to Maine a few times and I love it there. And Maine is a state with the second largest number of lighthouses. Actually, Michigan is first, if you didn't know that. And Michigan has over 100 and Maine has over 50. Of course, Maine has a smaller coastline, but it's just a really neat place to go, especially in the summer. And I had this lighthouse in my mind that looked like the one on the cover of the book. That lighthouse is actually Bass Island Lighthouse, which is on the coast of Maine. My lighthouse is based on that one, but mine is fictional. Mine is the Hope Harbor Lighthouse. And the my idea for the keeper's house was based on my stint as a volunteer lighthouse caretaker, which I've done 2 times at Little River Lighthouse off the coast of Maine. So this is Little River Lighthouse, and it is on an island also. And so we stayed in that keeper's house, and we kind of just kept everything going. And it does have 3 rooms people can rent as a B&B. So that house is the house I had in mind. The town I used was as a setting was Bar Harbor, Maine. The town in my book is called Hope Harbor, but it's like Bar Harbor. If you've ever been there, it's a small town. It's right there on the edge of the land. It's coastal, and it's touristy. And the interesting thing that I found out going there was that the proprietors, many of them, I'd say the majority of them, shut down around October and don't reopen till sometime like March because the winters are so harsh and there aren't many tourists that go there during that time of the year. So only the diehard locals are there during the winter months. So I kind of wanted to have that feel for Hope Harbor as well. What I knew about lighthouse restoration, go back here a minute, was the fact that Little River Lighthouse had been abandoned for a while until a group of individuals formed a group to save it and volunteered to rescue the lighthouse, the keeper's house, which was in terrible shape. So there was a lot of renovation that had to be done before it could be opened again. So knowing those people and their story, plus I know a man who has bought a couple, maybe 2 or 3 lighthouses and renovated them and turned them into bed and breakfast, was my source of information. And then I just happen to have a son who's in construction management, and he knows what could go wrong in the renovation of historic property. And so that helped me. And give you a little teaser there about what could go wrong when you renovate a lighthouse or a historical property. One of the things about Abigail's Secret, what I wanted to let you know, is that it's a multi-generational story. So you actually have 3 women's stories involved in this. Plus you have romance, because you have to have romance in a story, because the Carson Stevens who owns the lighthouse. And then you have some family secrets that we discover. The next book I want to talk about is called The Heart of the Midwife. This story was set in New Orleans. I'm a native Louisianan, so I wanted to set the book in an area that I knew about. I grew up about 45 minutes down the road from New Orleans, and I've been there several times, so I thought I knew it pretty well. But I didn't know it quite as well as I thought I did. So the research was very eye-opening. I learned a lot about the culture. And even though, of course, I knew there were French there, I really didn't understand the diversity of the groups that happened in the mid-1800s. There was basically the French Quarter, because the French lived there when it was belonged to the French colonies, and actually belonged to the Spanish longer, but it was settled by the French first. And so there was a large population of French. Around the 1850s, a lot of, as they call them, Americans, people from the United States moved into the area, bought property, plantations, and so on, and they built their mansions on the outskirts of the French Quarter, and that became known as the Garden District. So there's actually a street in New Orleans called Canal Street, and I learned that that was kind of the dividing line between the Americans and the French. So there was a cultural diversity there. There's also a voodoo queen. As a result of the people who came into the area, and many of them as slaves were Creoles, which is a mixture of French and Black, and then there was the French. These people brought their culture from the Caribbean with them, which had a lot of voodoo. If you think of Haiti, there's still a lot of voodoo there. So they brought those practices into New Orleans. I did a lot of research about midwives too, because I didn't know anything about midwives. So I did a lot of watching Call the Midwife. And if you haven't seen that show, it's an excellent show. And even my husband watches it, which tells you something. It's a very good show. And also the fact, though, that show was set in England right after World War II. My story is set in 1890 in New Orleans. So it's about 50 years behind that. So I had to figure out what was the same and what was different about the culture. One of the things that was very different was that in the 1800s, women didn't normally have doctors. They had no gynecologists, no doctors weren't involved in childbirth. And men looked, and doctors looked at that, the medical profession looked at childbirth as women's problems. They really didn't want to get involved. So, and from what I understood, to a point, the hospitals weren't any cleaner than being at home for a long time. So most of the midwifery was done by older women who had had a lot of babies. But my character is a trained nurse who comes into town to be a midwife, but to also be a nurse. So she is kind of fighting against the culture to show that women need medical care as well, and introduce things like hygiene and cleanliness and all those things it took people a while to understand that those things make a difference. So when she comes into this area, one of the things that she runs up against is the voodoo. And there was my person's Madame Lafleur, and it was based on Marie Laveau. Okay. This is a picture supposedly of Marie Laveau, who was the voodoo queen in New Orleans for about 50 years. She wielded a lot of power. A lot of people believed in her, not just the poor, but a lot of government officials. People just weren't really sure about whether she had powers or not, so they just kind of did what she said. So when you have this young American nurse, actually she has French ancestry, but she's not Creole French. But she moves into the area to live with her uncle. She comes there from Virginia. And so she runs up against this cultural problem, as well as other people who don't understand that women's health is a medical issue. And one of the people that she runs into is this young doctor who just graduated from Tulane University in New Orleans. His name is Julian Charbonnet. One thing I did enjoy about this story was choosing the names. You hear names in Louisiana you won't hear anywhere else. If you want to know something about it, watch an LSU football game, because the names are just, I love hearing them because you don't hear them anywhere else. But my main character's name is Camille Duval, and the male romantic interest is Julian Charbonnet. Now, if you just see that written, you're probably going to call it Charbonnet because that's the way it's spelled. Tell you a little bit more about Madame Lafleur, who is her nemesis. she tries to get in the way of Camille's practice. And my story, by the way, is called Between Two Worlds. Heart of the Midwife has 4 novellas in it, if I didn't say that already. And my novella is called Between Two Worlds. Just wanted to let you know, this is an actual crypt of Marie Laveau, that was the voodoo queen in New Orleans. And there are still people who leave flowers and different things because they think that she might still have some power from the grave. And for a while, people were marking X's on it, like sending messages, and the local authorities had to stop that because this thing is over 100 years old and it started to decay. So they have to keep people from doing stuff like that. But they can put flowers, and so they still do that, which I think is just amazing. The next story that I wanted to tell you about is called MISStletoe Mishaps. It's a novella collection as well. There's 5 novellas in it. And my novella is called Kaetlyn's Cup of Christmas Cheer. This story almost didn't get written because I forgot I was supposed to write it. But I got a call from my editor saying, how's it going? And so I'm like, oops, better hurry up. So fortunately, the story came together pretty easily because I had done some research about things like that before. And this is what the collection looks like. And it's all in one. It's 5 stories in one, but this is what the collection looks like. And that's what my cover looks like for my story. And so my setting is 1910 in New York City and Jekyll Island, Georgia. The story is, it follows the story of some Irish immigrants who leave Ireland to come to New York looking for a better opportunity. And they become servants to the wealthy in New York City. The Jekyll Island comes in later, but that's the place I studied when I did the book and visited when I wrote the book, The Gilded Curse. So my research for this book, of course, Downton Abbey, I don't know if y'all watch Downton Abbey or not, but I mean, it really shows you the class distinctions and the life of the servants. And that's what I was very interested in. It shows the hierarchy and all of that. The servants to the wealthy in America were similar. They were copied off the English. They weren't exactly the same, but they copied as much as possible. There was a place that we toured a few years ago called the Elms in Newport, Rhode Island, which gives you, the servants tour. And so my book is based on that house. Let's see if I can, which is this, the Elms. It's unbelievable. And so I really like doing the servants tour because, I think there's a whole lot known about how wealthy people lived and how ostentatious they were. But I was just fascinated in how the servants lived, how the behind the scenes scene was. Also, the Biltmore House in North Carolina has a servants tour now that's a backstairs tour that can show you how the servants got around getting to because the servants didn't walk through the front door and they didn't walk around freely in the house. Most of the time they used the back stairs. This is a cottage in Jekyll Island, Georgia. Now, the wealthy people, I don't know if you know this or not, but the people who were very wealthy had 3 and 4 homes, and they didn't stay in one any length of time. This house here, the Elms, I think they were only there 3 or 4 months out of the year. And they had a huge staff. And some of the staff stayed there year round, just taking care of the house, just making sure it was still clean and running, even though the people that owned it weren't there. During the cold winter months in New York, there was a group of people who went to Jekyll Island. There's a millionaires village there that was started back in the late 1800s. It was a club of 100 of the wealthiest people in the United States. They joined this club, and it was an island that was just for them to go play. They hunted, they fished, and they built a golf course. So, this is just a little cottage. Can you imagine going from that to this. So obviously they took servants with them when they went there, but not at nearly as many. They didn't need nearly as many. Also, while they were there, the place was a lot more relaxed, low key than although, the women still changed clothes about 3 and 4 times a day. Um, but it wasn't quite as formal because they were, camping out, I guess. So the servants got a little more latitude and they were able to um, visit and socialize with each other. This is the Jekyll Island Clubhouse. This was built in the late 1800s. It's still there now, and it's still a hotel. It's a hotel now. You can go there, and I've been there. It's decorated for Christmas in this picture, which just happens to be the time of year for my story. This clubhouse was where all the social activities took place for the wealthy. They took almost all their meals there. In fact, most of those cottages, most of them didn't have kitchens. And some of them brought their chefs with them, and their chefs worked out of the hotel. Go back to this again. The servants lived in the attic of the houses, and unless they didn't have enough room, and they had some other quarters they could live in on the property. So that's what the Jekyll Island Clubhouse looks like, and this is where my characters end up in the story. They start in New York and they end up there. One of the fascinating things about the research was for this book was finding out about the Irish immigrants that came to America. There were it started with the potato famine in the mid 1800s, but it continued through until around 1920 or so. They just abandoned Ireland. And there was a time period when New York City had more Irish population, a greater percentage of Irish population than Dublin, Ireland did. So that's pretty amazing. And almost all of them became servants. In some places they were looked down upon. The Irish were looked down upon, and you probably know that already. But many of them went on to be very successful and own their own businesses. And there are stories about them that you can read from the Elms and from the Biltmore House. So that's for my novels and novellas. I don't know what that one is there for. Another book that I'm thankful to be part of is a Daily Guidepost devotional book. It's been coming out for I don't know how many years, many years. But they hire authors to write devotions, and I'm very thankful that I just signed my contract for the 7th year to be in it, which is actually 2023. But the 2021 copy came out about 2 months ago. So you can get your copy of Daily Guidepost. Not about you, but I like to read a devotion a day to start my day. So I'm very thankful that I was able to contribute to this again. One other thing I wanted to let you know about is the Christmas gazebo. This book came out last year, I think maybe November or December last year. But since it's Christmas time, I thought you might like to know about it if you didn't already. I partnered with writer Lenora Worth, who's a multi-published writer. And we wanted to we thought it was kind of fun to do this book. It is based on the lake and the history of Defuniak Springs. So the only thing different, much of it is very much the same. I did the historical story. It's 2 novellas. I did the historical story, and then she did the contemporary story. And both stories take place with the setting of the same Victorian house. So we researched by looking at all the houses there in Defuniak Springs and kind of putting our house together. The main difference is that the houses in Defuniak are across the street from the lake. We put our house on the lakeside. But other than that, we copied the history of Defuniak as far as the Chautauqua Assembly that used to meet there was very popular. So it's just a short little 2 novella book, but it's a little Christmas book if you're looking for a Christmas read. And I think it's only 99 cents on Kindle, which is a really good deal. Okay, so I think that tells you about all my recent books. If you're interested in getting my newsletter, I believe that Sarah's going to have this up on the screen for you. If you want to, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love you to sign up if you want to. I only do a newsletter once a quarter normally. Some people do them much more often, but I just can't do that, and I don't want to fill people's inbox with a lot of stuff. I get other people's newsletters too, and I just don't have time to read 100 newsletters. So I'd love it if you'd sign up for mine. I usually have a giveaway. I also have a blog. I have two. I have a Lighthouse blog and a writer's blog. So you can go to this website and you can sign up for either the newsletter or the Lighthouse blog or the writer's blog or all three. Do you have any questions for me? Is there anything that I didn't cover? I've kind of ran through it pretty fast. So
we do have some questions, and one question from Sally is advice you'd offer regarding use of real location and names and then fictionalizing the names.
I have been to every setting I've written about except for one that was based on a fictional town out west, which was a novella. But I like going to a place where I've been. And, when I wrote The Gilded Curse, which was one story set at Jekyll Island, there was like a little thought ran through my head that when I was learning about the servants, what would it be like to be servant here? Because I wasn't writing about the servants in that book. So then when I had to brainstorm quickly for this one, that story came back to my mind that, oh yeah, servants at Jekyll Island, but they were going to start in New York. So I'm just really thankful that I have these places I've been, because I get my ideas from the settings. Now, a lot of people don't, but when I see a story, see a place, it makes me think of a story of something that could happen in that place. Now, what I did about Abigail's Secret, Hope Harbor, and not using the real place, because for one thing, Bar Harbor is there, and I wanted to make my story work in my own town. So I didn't want somebody in Bar Harbor saying, oh, that's so-and-so, or that didn't happen, or whatever. So I just borrowed from the places I'd been and created my own place.
We have a comment that from Sally that she read Abigail's Secret, and it's very enjoyable with a bit of mystery. And I commented that I loved The Gilded Curse and its sequel. I've read both of those and really enjoyed them. And I've got some more questions if you're ready.
Sure.
Okay. When writing a dual time book, do you write the story simultaneously, or do you kind of have one you start with and then start weaving them together? How does that process work?
You can do either one. I know some people that do one story and then they do a separate story and then they weave them together. That's not the way I write. I think they call it organically, so that this happens, then that happens, and this happens, then that happens. I mean, I know some people who write and they move paragraphs around and move scenes and story. I mean, I seldom do that because I'm following my characters along. So what I did was I knew the time frame I was using for the historical. So I just started it at the beginning of that time frame. And it was basically the same year in 1944. So I was given, snippets of the story going on in 1944 as the person in the contemporary person was discovering things at the lighthouse, the keeper's house where she was working to renovate.
Kind of tying in with the Jewel time book. When writing with a co-author like Lenora Worth, where you had two stories, how is it working with another author like that?
It can be hard. With Lenora, we went together to the site. We agreed on the names of our characters, which we decided would start with the same letters. Um, we agreed on how we were going to design our house. So we looked at pictures and we put the house together. And she would say, "Hey, I put this in my house, so you might want to put it in yours." Or I would say, "No, I have this large, this veranda on the back side, and not the front side." And so we kind of had to uh, plan our setting more together than the story itself, because my story happened in the past. So she pretty much just took it from there. It was 100-year break, so there was not a continuous story that had to be done, which makes it a little easier. Now, I did collaborate slightly on another novella collection, which I don't think turned out as well. We used the same town. It was a fictitious town. Um, and we said, okay, this is my character's going to, be this person. My character's going to be this person. Like mine's going to be a rancher. Mine's going to be a sheriff. But my character turned a saloon into a restaurant. So I said, I told the editor or whoever, I said, make sure you put my story before, so-and-so story who was going to have the restaurant, because there wasn't a restaurant before my person built it. And then when they put the book together, they put the stories in alphabetical order by the last name of the author. Well, guess what? Turk is last. So my story ended up being the last one in the book. Therefore, there was another story that mentions the restaurant before it was built. So we were kind of irritated with that because we didn't realize that was going to happen. But I think that's not as hard as I know. There are other collections. There are series of books where one series picks up the characters for the next book and goes on from there. That I think is a little more difficult because you have to make sure you keep this. You either don't kill off somebody who's going to show up in the next book or something like that. But I'd be willing to try it because there are companies that publish books like that, and so I'm willing to try something new. And that's why I love to read split times, and that's why I wanted to try to write one. So there are authors that do it, all the time. All their stories are split time, and I love them. But this is my first, so I try different things. And also in Abigail's Secret, it's mostly, I'd say most of the story is contemporary, although I'd like to think it's 50-50. It's not quite. And I'd never written a contemporary story. So I found that it wasn't as difficult as I thought because, my character's about the same age as my children. And so I kind of knew how they thought. Oh, and the other thing I just want to tell you, the other thing I realized is that I've done a survey about this before, is that a lot of women, young women, feel like all their ancestors, their grandmother, maybe their mother, but mostly they'll say their grandmother, were really strong women. And a lot of, I think, but if you were them, would you have thought you were a strong person? You were just dealing with life. And so that's why I wanted to tell Abby's grandmother's story, to see like what she was thinking about what was going on, and if she always felt strong or if she didn't. So that's probably more than you asked me, but that's the answer.
That's great. That's great. And I have a follow-up to that on, since you usually do historical fiction, and the Abigail Secret does delve into World War II, but do you have a favorite time period that you like to travel back to?
I do now. I've changed. I used to think it was the Civil War era, but I wrote one book set in 1861, and all the rest of them follow it. Uh, they somehow have ended up in World War II, and to me it's very fascinating. It's just I don't know why, particularly the European theater, and a lot of the books I read that are dual time are set in France or Germany or the Netherlands or England. uh, I just find that so fascinating because of the way their lives changed during that war, because the war was there where they lived. And so I'm always interested to learn more about that. And I still have, you know, a story I want to write that I learned about. And also, my husband's father and mother met as a result of World War II. So, I think, I'd like to write their story. I wish I could find the letters they wrote each other. But I would say right now that's my favorite time period is World War II.
That's one of mine too. So I think Abigail's Secret's next on my list.
Oh, good.
I don't think we have any other questions. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Maybe what you're working on now?
What I'm working on now. Oh my goodness. Well, I will tell you what I have signed contracts for next year. I have right now they're novellas. I have one that I'm really eager to start on, but I can't start it until I finish this book I'm writing now. I signed a contract for a book from Barber Publishing called The Librarian's Journey, which is based on the pack horse librarians of the Great Depression. And if you've not heard of them, it's very, very interesting. It was part of I think, the New Deal, the FDR's help for the country to give people culture. And I mean, it's like picture COVID and no jobs. It's kind of like we didn't get that bad, but the stock market crashed back in the depression, and so there were more people out of work than were working. So anyway, my story, is called Book Lady of the Bayou. So I get to go back to an area I'm familiar with. Now it's going to be set in Mississippi, but the terrain, the geography is going to be very much like Louisiana because I have relatives from both states and I've been to both states. And my father was also a teacher when many years ago, before he started another career. But one of the first things he did was when he was a school teacher. And I learned that he would probably, I don't know if he had a car then or not, but anyway, he'd travel down the road to an area, then he needed to get across to an area that was on the other side of the river, which wasn't a huge river, not like Mississippi, but he would get in a boat, which was probably what we call a pirogue now, canoe, and paddle across to the other side where there were a lot of French Acadians. This particular area was called French Settlement. So all the other people in this story collection are going to be riding horses. Mine's going to ride a horse and paddle a boat. So plus, I don't think the other people are going to run into gators. And of course, you're going to have to run into a gator if you're going to be in the swamps of Mississippi or Louisiana. So I'm looking forward to writing that. And I have 3 books to read for research. But the book I'm writing right now is another lighthouse book. It's one I started a long time ago that it was going to be a novella, and I've turned it into a novel. And it's based on a real person that was a traveling lighthouse teacher. That was the state of Maine passed a rule or law or whatever to provide a teacher that traveled to the various lighthouses to teach the children of the lighthouse keepers off the coast of Maine. So my story follows someone based on a real person. I just pray I can get that book finished this month because I have 2 novellas to write by March 1st, plus devotions to turn into daily guideposts by March 1st. And I am really not that fast. So
you have a lot on your plate, but they all sound great. Thank you so much for presenting.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thank you for having me as a guest. And I don't know if everyone's hung up already, but
Nope. I think we
the
still are in.
one
Yeah.
thing I'd like to know is if what you'd like to hear from an author in a newsletter, because sometimes, what's normal for me is not normal for everyone else. So I might not think about sharing that information. So I'd really like to hear from people. I'd like to, sign up, and then I'd like to hear back and know, what you want to hear, what you want to know, and whether you find something interesting or not. And also, if you do read my books, please leave a review. Please, please, please. It's kind of like the lifeblood of an author is to have reviews. So
And then reviews can be on Amazon or Goodreads or personal
yes, like
blogs.
BookBub is another place.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the name of it. Yeah. So yeah, tell your family, tell your friends.